Realistic praxis, right? Praxis means actually living in the world, right? Any realistic praxis necessitates some killing, exploitation, and suppression. Okay? Sessions has categorically rejected any differential axiology on the grounds that hierarchies of value lay the groundwork for claims of moral superiority. All right? Quoting John Rodman, Sessions cautions that any comparative axiology merely reinstates a pecking order in the moral barnyard. All right? So the fear that they're trying to deflect by staking out biocentric egalitarianism, that's their territory, right? That's their little position. They're going to defend that. And the reason they want to defend that is because they identify differential axiologies as being too much, they have too much in common with the hierarchies of value that they're trying to get away from, right? The anthropocentric hierarchies of value that deep ecologists are rejecting. So there's no, that's the only position that makes sense to them is biocentric egalitarianism, right? Because if they go away from that position, then they are endorsing some kind of hierarchy. And many of them are anarchists, right? We try to use words carefully. All right, anarchist doesn't mean some wild-eyed person with a big bushy beard, going around, right? It just means someone who anarchy. Archy is structure, specifically structure invested with moral hierarchy. Okay, so it's not that they're opposed to structure. They're opposed. An anarchist is opposed to structures that carry with them all the familiar hierarchies about how that our culture has endorsed for thousands of years that we need to get away from, according to radical environmentalists. All right, so anarchy is just an a declining of moral hierarchy, and in defense, right? And because they want to decline, they want to deflect any kind of moral hierarchy, they're going to embrace biocentric egalitarianism. All right. But the second principle that they want to embrace is metaphysical holism. Okay, and here they might get themselves into some trouble. One can apprehend ontological interconnectedness through enlightenment or self-realization, right? Enlightenment, overcoming self-imposed immaturity, right? We can still rely on Kant's definition. I think that's also what Nass would have in mind when he talks about enlightenment. Self-realization, becoming active, right? Understanding oneself and then acting on that understanding, understanding the world and then acting on that understanding, not acting on the basis of assumptions which you haven't criticized, which you haven't critically analyzed, right? But according to deep ecologists, a mature person will apprehend that everything in nature is interconnected, okay? There is no firm, okay? We can make no firm ontological divide in reality between the human and the non-human realm. To the extent that we perceive boundaries, we fall short of deep ecological consciousness, right? And we fall short of enlightenment. We have not been as radical and critical with ourselves as we are obligated to be, okay? Right? We're still immature. We're still childish until we reach that point where we realize that our bodies, our selves, extend all the way around into the ecology, right? Isn't that fascinating, right? Deep ecologists insist, right, that the process of growing up, of becoming a mature human being, is a process of steadily expanding the boundaries of oneself outward, incorporating more and more of the life world into the self. Okay? So in some ways, right, they're kind of describing a process that Leopold described in long-term cultural historical terms, right? Deep ecologists seem to be saying that the process of an individual life for an aware person, for a person who's pursuing education and truth, right, and enlightenment, the natural process of that life is analogous to the process that Leopold sees taking place over a long period of time at a cultural level. And that is a process of increasing one's sense of responsibility, right? Right? Because not because not just, for many reasons. Also because ourselves are bound up with the greater world, with the ecology, right? Through this awakening, the ontological boundaries of the self extend outward, incorporating more and more of the life world. This insight discloses that there is in reality only one big self. The life world, a notion developed, and then this guy Alan Watts was very popular in the late 60s and early 70s. Another one of those Bay Area, kind of Bay Area hippie intellectuals. I climbed Mount Tamalpais and took acid and stayed up all night, stuff like that. That's beautiful, that Mount Tamalpais, that whole area is just unbelievable. Wow. But yeah, a lot of stuff was going down there in the Bay Area in the 60s and 70s. All right. So once ontological boundaries between living beings are recognized as illusory, one realizes that biospherical interests are one's own. Okay? This is it. Biospherical interests are one's own. So when I defend the rainforest, I'm defending my own body. Okay? That was the activist, I forget his first name, John Seed. Okay? I am part of the rainforest protecting myself. I am that part of the rainforest recently emerged into thinking. The change is a spiritual one. All right? Thinking like a mountain, sometimes referred to as deep ecology. Okay? And note the reference to Uncle Aldo. Because the rainforest is part of the activist John Seed, he is inherently obliged to look after its welfare. Right? Inherently obliged to look after. Isn't that interesting? Yes.
Could you maybe clarify what they're trying to mean by the rest of nature? I'm not understanding that. What is the rest of nature?
I think land, air, water, wildlife. Land, air, water, wildlife.
They mean like what's left of nature?
No, I think they mean nature besides ourselves. I think they're challenging the view that as long as we don't harm ourselves, like, slash ourselves or the axe slips, as long as we're just using the chainsaw to cut down trees, hey, it's all good, right? We're not really hurting ourselves. The deep ecologist comes along and says, hey, we actually are hurting ourselves. You don't have to slip the chainsaw and cut off your leg, because those trees you're cutting down are part of yourself.
So then how would you feel about like a lion killing a zebra? Or us killing
yes.
a deer for food.
Well, now you're pointing out something that they may be getting themselves in hot water with their biocentric egalitarianism. Is the biocentric egalitarian committed to the abolition of lion predation? Yeah, let's turn all the lions into vegetarians, right? We got to set them up in a zoo and just give them soy-based products, right? But no, that's ridiculous, right? So. No, that's where the deep ecologist presumably will cite ecological knowledge about the benefits of predator-prey relationships in nature and how those predator-prey relationships actually enhance the well-being of the species involved, both the prey species and the predator species. So, right, so the deep ecologist, and that's where the deep ecologist kind of quickly, right? He jumps in the phone booth and changes his clothes, right? He gets rid of his biocentric egalitarian costume and he emerges with his metaphysical holism costume and says, it's okay, man, predation's okay. And maybe even with the macaw, the various indigenous groups that are still involved in traditional hunting and fishing and whaling and stuff, that all might be okay too from a deep ecological perspective, right? Because it's not utilitarian, it's not just going out and exploiting game animals or something, right? It's being done respectfully, right, as part of an indigenous cultural outlook. The prey animal is respected and not instrumentalized, not reduced into it's killed, but it's not reduced into an object the way a Western hunter might do, perhaps. So maybe a deep ecologist, these are very difficult questions, right? Some deep ecologists are adamantly against all hunting, period. All hunting, all fishing, period, right? No leather shoes, no leather coats, nothing, right? You'll be ostracized if you go try to hang out with the deep ecologist at the Radical Environmentalist Conference, right? You just show up with some leather shoes, man. They won't have anything to do with you, right? Yeah.
Are they okay with plastic shoes?
They would have, well, yeah, you know, that there are some problems, you know, I guess they would have to be, huh? The plastic shoes, probably, I suspect you're going to point out that plastic shoes might cause more death and destruction than leather shoes. So, anyway, right, it's a bewildering world we find ourselves in nowadays. But, anyway, it's one plausible way of this notion that the boundary of selfhood that we have accepted our whole lives, maybe there's something problematic about that, right? Metaphysically and even just practically, physically speaking, it may be a lot harder to define the boundaries of ourselves than we assume it to be. And maybe that's what the deep ecologists are saying, that we cannot separate ourselves from all these ecological processes. And so when we do things that harm these ecological processes, we're actually harming ourselves. It's kind of simplistic, artfully simple, right? Maybe not simplistic, just artfully simple. Now note, okay, the second part, this second note on this page of notes is very important, all right? And this is how they respond to some of their critics. The critics who are maybe raising the most powerful criticisms of all, of deep ecology. The two leading philosophers, Naas and Sessions, in the deep ecology movement have emphatically emphasized the phenomenological spirit of deep ecology and downplayed dicta. Okay, a more simple way, in words that you guys can understand, of saying that and making that point is that deep ecologists do not claim to be offering us moral norms. Okay? Now you might say, well, isn't that kind of what you're doing? Aren't you saying that we should not be treating the world in this industrial, disrespectful way? Isn't that your whole point? Right? Aren't you making normative claims? But they say no. What we're interested in is raising ecological consciousness. All right? Another way of rephrasing this, they're not interested in generating action norms. Okay? Deep ecology claims to not be interested in generating action norms, right? Action norms would be examples of dicta, right? You must do this. Dictate, things you must do this, right? You have these obligations, right? So, they're downplaying that and they're saying, look, we just want to raise consciousness. And once people's consciousness is raised, then it will be second nature. The idea that we have obligations to protect ecological whole will just be second nature, right? And it won't be like, well, we were following some obligation or some rule, right? It'll be, well, this is natural, right? This is what we do because this is how we want to live, right? All right, so Naas has said, I'm not so much interested in ethics or morals, I'm interested in how we experience the world. The search is not for environmental ethics, but for ecological consciousness, right? And I would point that this approach to our subject matter is probably pretty consistent with Tom Birch, who we just got through reading. Right? It seems to me that Tom Birch would very much agree with this, right? And the project of identifying action norms and dicta, right, principles that are going to guide us, may be part of that imperial project that Thomas Birch criticizes, right? Part of the same shallow. It seems deep, right, because they're going around protecting wilderness. But notice the wilderness is always far away. It's never close to home like, Celilo Falls. So perhaps Thomas Birch has a point. That when the environmental movement is focused on wilderness preservation, it tends to underline an imperial project of separating out self from other, right? And wilderness happens to have enough value, to be protected and defended, but everything else is a sacrifice zone. Deep ecologists say, look, we need to start realizing that we have obligations to everything, right? That's part of ecological consciousness. All right. So some criticisms of deep ecology. The deep ecological principles of biocentric egalitarianism and metaphysical holism have elicited robust critiques. Some of the most interesting debates have centered on the normative status of deep ecology. All right? So this is really important stuff right here, right? Noss maintains that deep ecology is essentially descriptive, right? In the philosophy class, this is what we're interested in. Noss insists that he's trying to disavow making normative claims, right? Maybe a little bit disingenuous. It seems like, close to his heart is the project of defending the claim that we ought to be more respectful of ecological wholes, and that seems a lot like it. That is a normative claim. So anyway, Noss maintains that deep ecology is essentially descriptive. For Noss, unmitigated empiricism or ecophenomenology promotes a direct experience of the qualities of nature, its concrete contents. Deep ecology is simply an enumeration of general principles that command the assent of persons open to the direct apprehension of nature. Right? Maybe a bit patronizing and paternalistic, right? Well, you're just not open to the direct apprehension of nature, and that's why you can't understand these principles, right? Right? You could see a critic, wait a minute now, what are you talking about? I don't accept these principles, and yet I am open to the direct apprehension of nature. So don't go around trying to, right, that's ad hominem attack me and, give me this straw man stuff about how you don't understand because you're not open to the direct. Well, I am open to the direct apprehension of nature, and I still don't accept that we have these deeper obligations to ecological wholes, right? So anyway, scholars have found the disclaimer that deep ecology is not a normative system and ought not to be judged disingenuous, right? So this is what some other environmental ethicists who have taken a critical view of deep ecology have concluded that they're a little bit disingenuous when they claim to not be making offering normative guidelines, when they claim to only be describing experience. They're being somewhat disingenuous, all right? Some regard deep ecology as strident axiological egalitarianism that is useless in adjudicating conflicting interests. If all organisms are of equal value, then there is no basis upon which to make prescriptions, right? Prescriptions, more to make, you should do this. Because the kind of value distinctions necessary for evaluating the moral situations of environmental ethics are deliberately disqualified, all right? Right? You see how that works? If all organisms are of equal value, then there is no basis on which to make moral claims and resolve a moral struggle. Okay? That seems like a big problem. This biocentric egalitarianism may be just this big anchor around the necks of these poor deep ecologists. Maybe they just need to cut that anchor loose and let go of it, and just join the Leopoldians and become metaphysical holists and reject, all the Schweizerians and the biocentric. Anyway, we'll see. The principle of biocentric egalitarianism on this view renders deep ecology impotent as an ethical theory. Environmental ethics is predicated on the possibility of a non-egalitarian axiology. And who shows up here? Old Brian Norton. You figured he was going to show up here. Right? Right? Because he's against these guys too. Brian Norton, and they don't like him either. I mean, they support, right? Brian Norton would come out and say, well, you guys advocate policies, right? And I advocate most of those, and that's good evidence of the convergence hypothesis, right? Just goes to show I'm on the right track, is what Norton would say. But he would say, look, we don't need all this heavy-duty metaphysical baggage, and it's weighing us down, all right? And he points out that from a practical standpoint, maybe deep ecology just can't, it's not workable from a land management standpoint, because it would force, right? Biocentric egalitarianism would force the umpteenth, right? There's so many of these elk, right? To be treated equally with one of the last, right? Biocentric egalitarianism says there is no principled reason to prefer saving the 120,000th, or get even more extreme. A pregnant endling, if that's possible, right? The last of its kind, the thylacine, stumbles out of the Tasmanian wilderness, right? And she's pregnant too. She's the very last one, right? Well, if you're a biocentric egalitarian, then you don't have an answer to the question, well, should we, is there something special about this pregnant thylacine? right? Anyway, and so that may be environmentally, ethically suspicious. Baird Collicutt has surmised that environmental ethics must manifestly not accord equal moral worth to each and every member of the biotic community. These scholars argue, therefore, that biocentric egalitarianism must be scrapped. This is Richard Sylvan. He used to be called Richard Rutley. Richard Rutley, the last man, the great Australian environmental ethicist who bequeathed to us the last human example. Later changed his name to Richard Rutley. His wife was named Val Rutley. It was Val and Richard Rutley, this big environmental ethics couple or whatever in Australia. And then they got divorced. Then they changed their names. She became Val Plumwood and he became Richard Sylvan. Val Plumwood's a very well-known ecofeminist. Sometimes we read one of her essays in this class, but unfortunately we didn't have enough time to fit her in. All right. So, according to these critics whose insights we've been discussing, there are irresolvable structural tensions between biocentric egalitarianism and metaphysical holism. All right? These critics argue that in light of the real functions of living natural systems, it is impossible to even come close to affirming both the ability of all, and this is the key, right? This is what the land manager cannot do. And so the land manager, if she is being asked to do both of these things by the environmental ethics tradition that she's relying on, right? If she's an ecologist, she's relying on this environmental, both ecological holism and biocentric egalitarianism, right? All of a sudden, the land manager, she's got her Smokey Bear hat on and she's just paralyzed. She doesn't know what the heck to do because she's trying to follow two completely different guidelines that can't be followed at the same time, okay? It is impossible to come close to affirming both. This is what the biocentric egalitarian would do, right, as a land manager. Both the ability of all individuals to flourish to old age, okay, and what the metaphysical holist insists that we must do, the integrity and stability of ecosystems. So you got to do one or the other. You can't be both. You can't be both a metaphysical holist and a biocentric egalitarian. The necessity, and so here's examples of what some wildlife managers call therapeutic hunting. And that's not therapy for the hunter. That's therapy for the population of ungulates, right? The necessity of, and Uncle Aldo was an advocate of therapeutic hunting, all right? Culling a herd when it grows too large for its ecosystem. The necessity of exterminating ungulates such as goats and pigs for the sake of the health of fragile tropical island ecosystems is but one example. Regard for the health of whole ecosystems might therefore require treating individuals differently, because individuals of different species have unequal utility or disutility for wholes. Okay? So, viewed from the standpoint of an entire ecosystem, biocentric egalitarianism and metaphysical holism might be mutually exclusive and inconsistent with each other. All right? So, and then social ecologists who we'll study next week, and ecofeminists, and the way I teach ecofeminism it's a branch of social ecology. I have also formulated robust critiques of deep ecology. Social ecologists, speaking as secular humanists of the European Enlightenment tradition, have excoriated biocentric egalitarianism as misanthropic. In particular, Murray Bookchin, who we'll read next week, criticized deep ecology for reducing humans from complex social beings to a simple species, a scourge that is overpopulating the planet and devouring its resources. Bookchin argues that deep ecologists' ahistorical zoologization prevents them from seeing the real cultural causes of environmental problems. So the social ecologists are noted for their analysis of economic conditions, namely the conditions of 21st century capitalism, global capitalism, that result in the kind of reductionism that deep ecologists are worried about. So whereas the deep ecologists are more inclined to just condemn the human being per se, right? The human being is fundamentally flawed, right? The social ecologists are considerably more charitable to our beloved animal, the human. And as I tend to be more charitable to the human and to recognize the infirmities that humans seem to be suffering from in the 20th and 21st century as resulting more from our a political economic system than from anything that's essential to human nature. Human nature is very malleable, and social ecologists tend to recognize that a little more carefully and clearly than deep ecologists, perhaps. All right? It's interesting how really deep ecologists and social ecologists at the cultural movement level have so much in common, right? They're all kind of crunchy granola kind of people, radical environmentalists, you know. And it's odd that philosophically they find themselves at such odds. And really, it's really only among philosophers that these tensions even come out. You know, normally they just hang out with each other and don't even notice them. We have to notice these things, right? All right. So the Australian philosopher Val Plumwood has criticized deep ecology by arguing that the notion of the expanded self results in boundary problems stemming from the impulse of subordination. There are serious conflicts of interest between constituent members of larger wholes. And she has argued that expansionary selfhood does not adequately recognize the reality of these conflicts. Ecofeminists suspect that self-realization is a front. Okay, now this might be somewhat reminiscent of Tom Birch's argument too, right? Perhaps, although Tom Birch, he's not directing his argument at deep ecologists, he's directing his argument at thinkers like Rolston. But ecofeminists suggest that self-realization is a front for an imperialistic philosophy of self, springing from the same motive to control which runs a continuous thread through the history of patriarchy. Okay, taken together, these various critiques have contributed to a significant consensus. All right, this is written, this by the way is from, I think it's from the Encyclopedia of Environmental Ethics and Philosophy. Most of what I've taken, most of what is contained in these notes on deep ecology, I basically stole from the, and that's a great resource for you guys. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but it's available online, just like Tom Birch's essay is available online through the PSU library database. Okay? But look up the book. It's called The Encyclopedia of Environmental Ethics and Philosophy. And every entry in that encyclopedia is written by an expert in her or his particular field within environmental ethics and philosophy. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that resource, as I did when I put together these notes on deep ecology. But you can download it. You don't have to go to the library and get it. You can get it. You can read it online, and you can print stuff out. So everything, really, it's an amazing resource. I would encourage you to use that resource, and then use each other too as a resource to get ready for your essay, for your term paper, and to get ready for either your final project or your written final exam. I would encourage you to use each other and use this resource, the Encyclopedia of Environmental Ethics and Philosophy. All right. And this is written fairly recently, like just a couple of years ago. These various critiques that we've summarized in these notes here have contributed to a significant consensus that deep ecology has reached its logical conclusion. All right. I think it's fair to say that this is a consensus among professional environmental philosophers. Deep ecology has reached its logical conclusion philosophically. Now, it's still a vibrant and vital and important cultural movement, okay? But among academic environmental philosophy, for example, this textbook removed in the 4th edition, the section on deep ecology was removed from this anthology. And compared to other prominent theories, and I would say the prominent theories that are kind of hinted at here are environmental pragmatism and social ecology. And so compared to those, and ecofeminism, and compared to those other prominent theories, deep ecology is not crystallized into a complete system. So maybe you could say it lacks integrity, right? just as a generic statement. I'm not saying it's bad, right? It doesn't have the kind of integrity that, for example, environmental pragmatism has. As Rothenberg states in the English revision of Noss's earlier deep ecological thinking, deep ecological thinking is process without end. Okay? For Rothenberg, deep ecology is a set of precious hints about the real relations of culture and nature. And there's Arne Nass, the wild human in the wilds of Norway. Yes.
Is there an attendance sheet?
Yes, let me get that going around. Thank you for reminding me. And then now we're going to go over this. So you've already heard this term, metaethical pluralism. All right? And all the theories we're looking at are metaethical pluralist, all the integrated environmental ethics, and by that I mean environmental pragmatism, deep ecology, ecofeminism, social ecology, and even environmental virtue ethics are all metaethically, they're all pluralistic, okay? And the best way of explaining the sense in which deep ecology is plural is by citing this. This is the deep ecology apron diagram, okay? This is supposed to be an apron here. It's supposed to be kind of three-dimensional, but deep ecology is organized around its platform, right? The platform is in the middle of the apron. The shoulders and neck of the apron are where we find ultimate premises, okay? And the reason I insist and I point out this is absolutely the case. Arne Nass presents deep ecology as metaethically just wide open, and there is a vast range of ultimate premises that the deep ecologist can use to sort of weave together, justify, ground, if you will, or provide a superstructure, provide a metaphysical and philosophical superstructure for the deep ecology platform. Okay? So in that sense, deep ecology is metaphysically, metaethically pluralistic. Okay? The three, but Arne Nass intends that to be infinite. Think of level 1 as containing a potentially infinite number of different variations. Okay? And ultimately, Arne Nass suggests, probably insists, that each and every one of us is responsible. That's part of our life endowment. That part of what we have to do as living beings, as human beings, right? In this life, is to articulate our own ecosophies, right? Nass called he called ecosophy, right? But he said you could be a Buddhist, you could be a Christian, you could be a Spinozist like he was, and then you could be any range of other metaphysical self-descriptors, right? But what matters is the platform. And then the platform gets translated into practice. More or less general consequences, right? And then finally, the rules or decisions are at the level where your feet are, right? The skirt of the apron is the level of actual practice, right? So